Here's the issue. I think there's a problem today with many modern action movie fight scenes. So many movies use intense choreography, theatrics, blood and makeup effects, and over-the-top, hard-hitting moves to create an action-packed fight. Now, I'm not saying scenes like these can't be entertaining, but what I am saying is scenes like these aren't believable. There's a sense of realism that's missing from these fight scenes. So how do you film a believable fight scene? To answer this, let's take a look at director Park Chan-wook's Korean revenge thriller, Oldboy. Containing one of the greatest fight scenes put to film in the past 2 decades, Oldboy tells the story of Oh Dae-soo, a man inexplicably held captive in a room for 15 years with no knowledge of his captor or why he was captured. Though he taught himself how to fight during captivity, he's far from a professional fighter. So how does Park Chan-wook achieve a believable fight scene? The answer can be boiled down to 2 main ideas: the technical filming of a fight scene, and creating a victory that is earned. Let's start with how to film a fight. First, with the establishing shots. Let's pause here. This shot is obviously meant to shock us with the impressive opponents that lay before Dae-soo, but this shot also gives us a chance to take in where this fight is taking place. Not only is this hallway dark and grimy, this hallway is narrow. Barely 3 men can fill the width of the hallway at a single time, and even then it would be hard to move around. A few seconds later, we're able to see the hallway from another angle, and we again take in the claustrophobia of this environment. The men have to hug the walls in order to let their companions pass, and for a brief moment we realize that this cramped hallway might actually benefit Dae-soo. This environment gives Dae-soo an advantage over this large group of men. Park Chan-wook's establishing shots are important because before the fight has even begun, we already believe Dae-soo has the advantage, and we might even be able to see how he could win. One of the most obvious camera techniques Park Chan-wook employs is his framing. As Dae-soo initiates the fight, the camera cuts to a one-dimensional framing, allowing us to view a linear cross-section of the hallway. The movement of the fight has now been reduced to simple right and left, forward and back motion. This transition is excellent directing on Park Chan-wook's part, because the cramped environment has already been established in the previous 2 shots, and now we get to see the consequence of it. A few seconds into the fight, and we realize the framing complements Dae-soo's reduced defensive positions as well. He only needs to worry about what's in front of him or behind him. Again, big advantage for Dae-soo. Another obvious factor that adds to the believability of this fight is the lack of cutting. Park Chan-wook decides to film this fight in a single 2-minute and 40-second take. What this does is allow us to view the fight in its uncensored entirety. We see men slip and fall, push each other back, get pushed back onto the horde, and bash their weapons against the corridor walls. We see them become more unconfident and hesitant as the fight progresses. This is the chaos of the fight. Real fights are unchoreographed, sloppy, and chaotic. By letting us see this chaos without the interruption of camera edits, we can better identify what we are seeing as a real fight. Let's do a quick comparison. Which do you believe more as a real fight? This or this? Could you even follow the first one? This is the power of cutting, or rather, not cutting. By not cutting, Park Chan-wook gives us the chance to believe the fight by letting us see it as a complete, uncensored sequence. Now let's talk about an interesting idea that I think we all subconsciously process, but don't acknowledge in good fight scenes. Making a victory earned.
A huge part of conveying an earned victory is vulnerability. In Oldboy, we see Dae-soo losing, and most importantly, we see him get hurt, most notably here. This moment is important because for a little while, we think the fight is over. We realize he may have just lost the fight. He is far from a professional fighter, and he is far from being invincible. His vulnerability makes him more human and makes the fight more real. Don't believe me? Which one do you believe more? This or this? Luckily for Daesu, the fight isn't over, and at this point, we process his vulnerability as genuine, life-and-death effort that both shows us the risk he's taking and the perseverance he maintains, even when a knife is stuck in his back. This is a man that deserves his victory. The next key to conveying an earned victory has typically been absent in most modern fight scenes. Let's see if you can figure out what it is from these two clips. Who do you believe has earned their victory more? Jason Statham or Daesu? The key here is fatigue. This plays into vulnerability and effort. After Daesu gains the upper hand, we visibly see his fatigue set in. He's exhausted, and Park Chan-wook lets us see his exhaustion on purpose. He gives us an entire 20-second pause with Daesu catching his breath to think about how he managed victory, what he's been through, and the toll the fight has had on his physical body. When the one-dimensional shot ends, we see the consequence a real fight has on a relatively ordinary man. For a second, we almost believe he could have lost if the fight went on for a minute longer. But he didn't, and he earns his exhaustion and fatigue. He earns his victory, and we believe him. So, Park Chan-wook was able to create a believable fight scene using a few simple camera techniques and a great visual performance from the protagonist. But what was the effect of making the fight believable? Is this believability carried by Daesu for the rest of the film? Park Chan-wook decides to test the effectiveness of this scene by including a clever off-screen fight before the scene ends. Let's finish the scene and see if it worked. So, after believing Daesu's victory over an entire hallway full of men, did you believe that?